Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. I'm a clinical psychologist and medium, and here we explore life, death, consciousness, and what it all means. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. And if you've been here a while, thanks for your continued listenership. Just want to let everybody know that if you are not subscribed to my email list yet, please head over to Dr. Amy Robbins and you can subscribe there. Each week I send out an email with some channeled soul wisdom as well as some grounding, some things you can do to help ground yourself, which I know we all need right now. Does divine consciousness exist only with the Son of God or within all of us? Reena Kumsarasingham explores this question in her new book, appropriately titled Divine Consciousness. In 2012, Reena made a commitment to move into the new consciousness by living in the high vibration. She is passionate in helping others do the same by making new consciousness living accessible through all of her books, online courses, one-on-one therapy, and training. Welcome, Reena. I wanted to just take a minute to tell you all about the upcoming course that I'm offering, which I'm really excited about. Course or guide. I like the idea of guide better than course, but course is what you all identify with. So we'll call it that for now. Anyway, the course is going to be integrating a lot of what we talk about on the show, the notion of soul contracts, how to face your fears around death, how to embrace death, how to think about some of the lessons, or as I recently heard, sort of the curriculum of your life, and really use that to what I'm calling live your life backwards and really map out an understanding of where you're going and really tap into the essence of who you are. So if you are interested in this, I do have a waitlist that is getting started right now, and you can find that in my show notes. Also, something else I'm going to be trying out in next season is showcasing some small product-based businesses, particularly women-run, but I'm open to kind of anything. And if you have a product-based business that is in the genre of some of what we've talked about on the show, along the lines of like spirituality, maybe some wellness stuff, please reach out to me. I would love to use this platform to help support small businesses, especially now as people are really struggling for those businesses to stay afloat. So you can sign up in my show notes, and if you're interested in more information about the course, also you can please sign up for my newsletter at dramyrobbins.com, and you can email me or DM me on Instagram at Dr. Amy Robbins if you have a small business, a product-based business that you are looking to get some help promoting. And here's today's show.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy. I'm really pleased to be here.
I'm excited to be here too. And I just want to share with the listeners, we're sort of in like a weird reverse order here because Reena and I started talking. We like jumped right into this amazing conversation about her near-death experience that she recently had. And so we're going to have this discussion and this will air first. And then next week I will have Reena's near-death experience and our discussion about it. It was not supposed to be a podcast, but we just like got in deep fast. So I want people to hear that because it's quite an amazing conversation. And I think that it will be enlightening for people to hear your experience. But we're here to talk about your book today.
Thank you. Yes.
Let's start talking about what is divine consciousness.
Okay. So divine consciousness is basically another term for soul consciousness or your God self or your divine self or your soul. And it basically looks at whether we have a soul or a divine part within us, within our physical body, within our mental body, within our emotional body. Is there another level to us that is part of source or part of God or part of the greater divine? And so, with a lot of mainstream religious teachings, whether it's Christianity or Muslim or with a lot of mainstream Christianity teachings, mainstream religious teachings, the conversation has always been that the divine has always been external. So if we do something good, or if we do not sin, we'll get a blessing or a boon. I mean, this is, pardon me, this is very pertinent in the religion that I grew up in, which was Hinduism as well, right? So if you go to temple and you're vegetarian on certain days, and if you do certain things, you will most probably get a boon back. But then you also have the very esoteric teachings, which are not so mainstream, that focuses on the divine within. Are we divine within? Are we manifestations of God or the source, or the divine? And so this particular book, Divine Consciousness, looks at that and looks at how the teachings evolved in ancient Christianity as to the concept of God and the Son of God, and how that evolved.
And the premise of this book is really about two people who you did past life regression with.
That's right, yes.
Can you tell us about that and what you found and how you know that these were their past lives?
Okay. Yeah, I can. So I think to talk a bit more deeply about that, I'll have to go back to my first book, which is called Shrouded Truth. So, and just to give you how the story emerged. So as I said, I grew up in Malaysia, and Malaysia is predominantly a Muslim country, and I grew up a Hindu. So the only thing I knew about Christianity were Jesus died on a cross, and Christmas. And Christmas is just fun with a lot of presents. And that was it. That was about the extent of Christianity. And so when I moved to the UK, and I started my practice in the UK, where I'm based now, I had a client who came to me for between lives regression. And so with between lives regression, we always, one session is we always take them back to a significant past life before we do the between life session. And she went to this past life, and she basically, as the session went on, she basically identified herself as the brother of Jesus. And so I was really shocked because I didn't know Jesus had a brother. But, as part of being the therapist, you don't judge the story, you just help them flow through it. And so I helped her flow through it. And then when she came out of it, she says, yes, I think I was James, the brother of Jesus. And so I thought, okay, that's it. That's her story. Let's just leave it at that. And then a couple of months later, and this happened 9 years ago, a couple of months later, I had another call from a person in Denmark wanting to do between life session with me as well. And she was really cute, because she then went back. Her significant past life was another disciple of Jesus. And she identified herself as Thomas, the disciple of Jesus. And we went through the whole session, and I'm sitting there thinking, did Jesus have a disciple called Thomas? I didn't know that. So, but just raced her through it. And she came out going, did Jesus have a disciple called Thomas? And initially, we didn't know. And we Googled it. And sure enough, Jesus had a disciple called Thomas. And so that was her life. And over the course of 4 years, these different people came to me either via the Past Life Regression Academy, in which I train, therapists in, or whether they came to me as clients. I had 8 different people came to me who all had a biblical past life. But what was fascinating is the story that they shared is very different from mainstream narrative. And these people, didn't know one. I mean, I had someone from Singapore, I had someone from Australia, I had someone from Denmark, I had a couple of people from the UK. I mean, the only thing they had in common was me and coming to me for either training or for therapy. When these stories emerged, I thought, okay, I think the universe is telling me something here. So
yeah.
So what I did was I contacted all of them and I said, listen, would you mind, can we do more sessions? And obviously I didn't charge them for it, for the extra sessions. And I said, let's explore this further. And all of them were very open to doing it, except for one person. I mean, he went back to the life of Peter, but he didn't want to participate in the project. So I said, okay, that's fine, So the interesting thing is I delved a lot deeper into their individual stories. And when you get 8 people who don't know each other, but 80% of their accounts sort of dovetail into one another, and the main hook, the main turning point of the story is very different from what's actually known in the mainstream, something sort of went, okay, I think there's something real here. So I had
the main turning point being the crucifixion.
That's right, the crucifixion, yes, and what happened to Jesus during the crucifixion. But there were different things, elements that came through their individual stories that I found very, very fascinating as well. So when I took all the accounts, I said, all right, I need to check these accounts with research, with academic research, to see if anything made sense. And sure enough, there was a lot of research backing up a lot of these accounts, including names of emperors, at the time, including things like, the setting, what they ate, but also, timelines sort of all matched up, the names sort of all matched up. Not all the names, some of the names didn't match up, but most of the names matched up. And the crucifixion accounts also matched up. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to pull it together as a book and see what happens. But as I was working with these stories, I realized that there was more to three individuals. The first one was James, the brother of Jesus. There were like glimmers of teachings coming out in James's, initial batch of regressions. And I thought, okay, it'll be interesting to see what more happened there. St. Paul the Evangelist, there were some teachings coming up, and also Mary Magdalene, some more teachings were coming up there as well. So I asked the 3 of them if I could do more regressions just to get some of the teachings out. But I also wanted to know how the story evolved from the accounts that came up with Shrouded Truth and the crucifixion to the mainstream narrative, if that makes any sense. Because it's so widely different.
It's like a game of telephone.
That's right. It is like a game of telephone. And I mean, I was very fortunate because it did sort of come up with divine consciousness when I sort of dug a little bit deeper into James's life and St. Paul the Evangelist's life. But with Magdalene's life, well, and this is why it came out I decided, the Magdalene lineage came about was because, her story was so fascinating, and how she brought to life divine feminine principles, and how she spoke and taught divine feminine principles in a very patriarchal world is, ancient Judea was very patriarchal, was just absolutely fascinating. And I just thought it's something that is so relevant for us today as well.
So I want to get to the divine feminine, but my question before then, first of all, if people don't know what a between life regression is or anything, I did a couple episodes a while back with Robert Schwartz where you can listen to the different perspectives on past life regression and between life regression. So that's something that has been covered sort of more in depth on this podcast. But have you come across any other regression therapists who've said, wait, I had someone in my office who also said they were James or Mary Magdalene.
Yes, not so much James, but yes, Mary Magdalene. And so what I did was at the back of the book, I looked at how different people could go back to the same past life, especially if it's a well-known past life, like Mary Magdalene. And there are a few ways that one can do this. The first one is if as a soul and as a personality, if we idolize someone so much, when we go back into regression, sometimes the soul can pick up that story from the mass consciousness and sort of, experience it. So it's not so much one of their own, but it's something that comes from the mass consciousness. I mean, the second thing that can happen is confabulation, right? Confabulation is something where you've read something before, it's sort of stored in your long-term memory, and if you idolize or if you want to identify with this life or this character, it'll come through confabulation. And then you've also got the genuine past life. Why do I think that the Mary Magdalene that I sort of looked at was genuine? A few reasons. Number one, the person that I regressed, she's in the UK, but she wasn't Christian. She had no idea of any Christian. She hadn't heard of Mary Magdalene before. One of the things that came out in Shrouded Truth and the Magdalene lineage is that Mary Magdalene was married to Jesus and had 3 children. She had no idea. So her concept of Christianity was Jesus is the Son of God and died on the cross and, ascended. And so, it's fascinating how details like the name of her son or the name of her daughter, and like these details of what happened to Mary Magdalene when she went to France. I mean, the person actually said the name in the province of France as well. It felt very foreign to her tongue, so she struggled with it, but it sort of came out quite nicely. So, and also the amount of emotion she felt, and all of them felt during the session, was really visceral. And if you look at the neurophysiology, of where your emotional, I call it the emotional CPU of the, is stored, is very, very close to where you can retrieve, either deep memories or repressed memories or soul memories or long-term memories, as opposed to it being in where you make things up. So that is, again, another indicator that it is it is a genuine past life.
And what was the reason for coming that got you regressed to that life?
So different people came for different reasons. So a lot of people came for between lives, and we had to take them to a significant past life.
Okay.
Yeah, and then Saint Paul the Evangelist, he came because he had a problem, like a challenge with something, and he wanted to get to the source of the challenge. And when I sort of took him back to the source of the challenge, he popped into the life of Paul the Evangelist. A couple of them came from students in our regression course. So when we do the regression course, they each practice on one another. And so we know whether it's body therapy or going back to a past life that your higher mind picks for you. And a couple of them sort of popped into a biblical past life as well. And so it was all very, very random how it all kind of came together.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where you think to yourself, okay, the universe wants me to do something here, so I better pay attention.
When 8 people are showing up from the same biblical experience, it seems like there might be more to it than just random.
Exactly. And in Shrouded Truth, in Shrouded Truth, I did regress someone who went back to the life of Jesus. And I'm going to do that with air, I don't know. I'm doing
air quotes.
Yeah, because I messed with the process. So with all the other 8 people, the past lives came up spontaneously. With this particular person, I remember he was in a course and he was fighting quite hard for Judas during a general sort of lunch discussion, saying, Judas wasn't Judas, he was actually a good person, blah, blah, blah. And he was very passionate about it. And I sat there, thought to myself, I wonder if he was Judas. And so I said to him, would you like to experience or see if you had a past life during the biblical times? And then he sort of popped into the life of Jesus. But when I was regressing him, just the demeanor was very different. The story, the anecdotes were also, it wasn't very deep. It was quite on the level, quite superficial. And so I put his regression in the appendix to show the difference between what I think are, authentic past lives and what he did, which was more he idealized Jesus so much because he'd had lives as a Cathar before, as a Knight Templar before. So he idealized Jesus so much that he just, when I pushed the process and I messed with it, he popped into the life of Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it speaks to the power of the power of suggestion, right? And what happens when we can just let the process unfold versus if we try to shift or plant anything.
Exactly.
Throughout
That's
the process.
Exactly right. Yeah. And I mean, sorry, go on. It's something that we teach our trainer, and I was taught not to do that, but I was very naughty.
So when you talk about the divine feminine and the divine masculine energy, can you speak a little bit to what that is?
Yeah, I can. See, a divine feminine energy is not necessarily a woman energy, and the sacred masculine energy is not necessarily a man energy. It's something that it's almost like yin and yang energy. Like with yin, it's the very cool energy. It's the very reactive or responsive and the quiet energy, whereas the yang energy is the very, push, go forth, the very hot energy. So the feminine and the masculine qualities can be embodied by both men and women, but it has to be in balance for us to move into oneness. So some of the qualities, there is something called non-dual tantra, part of the Hinduism branch, that talks a lot about Shakti and Shiva. So, within Hinduism, Shiva is a deity, a male deity, but he's always supported by Shakti, who is the female deity. But Shakti in Sanskrit is energy. And Shiva is like the form that holds the Shakti energy. So it's almost like you need so for a river to flow, you need something to hold the river, to flow through, right? Without that thing to flow through, the river, the energy will basically go everywhere. And without the energy or the water, the thing that's holding the water has really no meaning for it. So some of the divine feminine elements is something like emotion. Emotion is an energy and it's a divine feminine element. Intuition is considered to be like a divine feminine element, and rationality is considered to be a sacred masculine element. So when you work together when you balance your intuition and you balance your rational analysis, you'll be able to perceive things in a very different way than you would if you just used rational analysis or if you just used your intuition. And once it is in balance, you're just a whole, you're a whole person, you're a different person, as it were.
Well, and it seems to me that I don't know, I've heard a lot lately about a push towards more feminine energy, that there needs to be a push towards more divine feminine energy. But it sounds like really that push needs to be there to pull into balance the masculine and feminine.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Not to just be solely a feminine energy, but to really balance out what has been sort of the more dominant masculine energy.
That's exactly right. Because if you think about it, and a lot of women adopt masculine traits, the sacred masculine traits as well. Because if you think about, say, the corporate environment, people sort of prize your rational analysis. And if you go and you say, well, my intuition, my gut says, blah, 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 some bosses may appreciate that and acknowledge that. But a lot of bosses are going to say, well, how are you going to back that up? Right? And also, I mean,
you can't respond. It's my divine feminine energy.
Exactly. They'll sort of stare at you.
Right. Maybe one day. It's a future we could all hope for, right?
Exactly. Yes. But I still think if you have it in balance, I think it's the best way. So if you're guided by your intuition, which in my view flows from your divine consciousness, from your soul self, and if you then take your rational analysis to affirm or to affirm your intuition, I think that is the strongest thing that we all have. But to listen to our divine feminine or our divine consciousness, it's a very quiet voice. It's a whisper, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of us live in a very loud world. Right? Like it's what we're going to do and what other people are saying. And, there's just so much noise that sometimes we don't listen to the quiet. So wisdom is a divine feminine attribute, and knowledge is a sacred masculine attribute. Knowledge without wisdom, in my view, can be weaponized, can be quite
dangerous. Yeah, exactly.
But wisdom without knowledge, it's, you're kind of saying things, but it's not sort of supported by
right.
You know what I mean? So when you have both, I think it's a very, very powerful thing.
Mm-hmm.
Another element of divine feminine is receiving. So if we can receive things with grace, and in a balanced way, that's where we're embodying divine feminine attribute within ourselves, whereas giving is a sacred masculine attribute. And so, if, say, someone opens the door for you, and I just use this as an example, because some of the women out there go, oh, I can open the door myself. What they're doing is they're embodying more of the sacred masculine attribute and suppressing the divine feminine of being able to receive that someone's just opened a door for you. Now, of course, you can go and open the door for someone else. So, a male can also receive the fact that you are opening the door for them. So it's, and I think a lot of women, especially in my practice, find it very difficult to receive things. Mm-hmm. And right? And, and a lot of it comes from the fact that they don't feel like they're good enough, or they don't value themselves. And, they just want to give to their family and to their loved ones. But in doing so, they're embodying more of the sacred masculine attribute. And so being able to receive with grace and feeling that we're valuable enough to receive is part of embodying the divine feminine. So it's things like this that we can do to bring in more of the divine feminine energy within us.
So what is this new, first of all, that was fascinating and super helpful to me, because I luckily get to ask the questions that I would want to ask if I was listening to a podcast.
That's right.
So that's the joy of having a podcast, is you get to ask all your own questions. What is the new consciousness, and how are we shifting into it? How do we shift into it? Because I don't know, whatever this old consciousness is clearly not working.
No, it's not. So I'm just going to fall back on some astrological information that I've got. Now, I'm not an astrologer, so I'm not an expert on it. But what happens is, as we move through every I think it's every 2,000 years, we move from astrological placement to another astrological placement. And it's just part of the precessional movement of the earth. And so for example, 2,000 years ago, when Jesus came along, we were moving from the age of Aries to the age of Pisces. So at this time, we are moving to a different age, and we're basically moving from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. What's also very fascinating about this time is that we have actually gone through all the 12 zodiac signs in that precessional movement, and we are starting a new rotation. So this is the first time in about, I think, 26,000 years that we are going into a different age. Within Hinduism, it's called, we are moving from the Kali Yuga. I'm not sure if you know, so goddess Kali in the Hindu deity mythology, she's quite a powerful, angry goddess. So they're saying that we're moving from the Kali Yuga to the Golden Age. And the Golden Age is basically an age of peace, we're moving from a chaotic period, constrained period, to a more freeing period. So whenever there's a shift in consciousness, the way I like to describe it is that it's almost like we bombarded by such high vibrational energy that it just shakes things up. Because, a simple metaphor is when you move houses, for example, you get shaken up, right? Like you go through all your things, you discard what you don't want, you keep what you do want, then you think, okay, I want to buy more of what I want. You go through and you dust, all the crevices of your house that you haven't dusted before, and all these like magical things suddenly appear, or the dust just sort of fills up your whole house. So it's a process of upheaval before you settle into your new house. And as we move from one consciousness to a different consciousness, it's also the transitional period brings up a lot of upheaval. So if you look at the period now that we've been going through for I think the past 4 or 5 years, we've had geopolitical shakeups. We've had, right now we're going through an economic shakeup. We're going through socioeconomic shakeups. Like everything is coming up for us to look at so that we can see this is what we want to keep and this is what we want to discard. So if I use the example from 2,000 years ago, during the time of Jesus, if you look at the history, there was a lot of upheaval. You had geopolitically, you had the Romans occupying ancient Judea. And that was shaking up the geopolitical system, because you had Herod and where basically Herod stays in the hierarchy. You had the Romans coming in, then you had the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who were the religious heads, so everything was moved around. And then you had Jesus, who came along with a completely different teaching, who was also shaking up the Pharisees and the Sadducees, right? Because he was, he basically was saying that the divine, everyone's divine and we don't need an intermediary to reach God. And then you had the Sadducees who are like, oh no, actually you do need us, and the Pharisees, so that's basically what was, and then you have to pay us tribute. And then you also had socioeconomic shakeups, because then the Romans suddenly came and said, we have to pay you more, we have to pay more taxes. So the poor people got poorer, the rich people got richer, but then there was yet another shakeup there, because a lot of the money was going to Rome. And, hierarchical structures were being shaken up as well. And if you bring that forward now, geopolitically, there's shakeup in every major country in the world. something is happening. I mean, we have, what's happening in the States, and in Europe, we have, the whole Brexit movement. And then in other countries, you have other things happening. COVID is part of the shakeup as well, a big global pandemic, because it makes us see what we value and what we don't value. Our entire lives have been changed, whether you want to work at home or work in an office, like how you shop, simple, basic things have just changed. The economy is affected by all this as well. So there's a lot more unemployment, for example. But then there are also people who are doing really, really well. So, a lot of businesses have moved online now as opposed to face-to-face. So all this is part of the moving and the shifting to the new consciousness, because we get a chance to see what we want to keep and what we can discard. And maybe there's something new that can come for us to embrace as we move to the new consciousness.
So how do we encourage people to, I know you talk about this on your website a little bit, like raise their vibration so they're kind of matching that consciousness? Or how do we raise our vibration so we don't get kind of pulled back into the space of the old consciousness?
Yeah. So the first thing to do is to try to disengage with some of the things that are very much attached to the old consciousness. So one of the things, if I can just use my experience, because you mentioned that we had a very deep conversation earlier, because I had COVID in March. And when I had COVID in March, when I looked, and because very little is known of this disease, I was actually looking outside to get some information of how I can manage and get better from COVID. But when I looked at all the mainstream media, all the mainstream media were talking about how many people had died and how many people had something amputated. I mean, it was the worst case scenario. So for me, I felt like the mainstream media and the world were willing me to die because I couldn't find any source of strength. All I could find was a lot of weakness. And then when I moved on to social media, thinking, all right, maybe there's something here for me, what I saw were a lot of debates and battles between to mask or not to mask, to isolate or not to isolate, to vaccinate or not to vaccinate. Do you know what I mean? And there was nothing for me to hang on to get some strength. And so the other thing I realized, because I was so weak as well when I had COVID, is that even when you have COVID and there is no strength, nothing is helping me shift my vibration up. But, I could find things personally in my life to give me strength to come out of it. So when we live in that much fear and that much conflict, that normally happens in social media where there are these debates of, emotional issues, we sort of hang on to an old consciousness. Even when we resist something we don't like or we don't agree on, we are still hanging on to the old consciousness instead of creating what we want and what we agree with in the new consciousness. So, Mother Teresa had a really great quote about this, because she said, I will not go to a rally against war because I'm still in the consciousness of war. I will attend a pro-peace rally because that is what I want and that is what I want to create. So that is one of the ways that we can move out of the old consciousness and sort of create what we want in the new consciousness. The second thing is judgment, because when we are leaving something that we're very used to and we're sort of moving into the new normal, the way we live our lives, the measures, those judgments, they tend to not be as relevant anymore. And so And if we're still hanging on to these judgments and these belief systems, it's very difficult to break and go into something very new. We'll still be stuck with in the old consciousness. So being very aware of our belief systems and what we judge, and sort of stepping back and observing what we judge and why we judge it, and being able to let that go, is easier said than done, but it's a huge part of moving into the new consciousness. How we consume food, like how we judge food or how we consume food, can also be, an integral part of moving into the new consciousness. So to give you an example, this brought it home. When I had COVID, I couldn't cook because I was in bed for 8 weeks. And, my poor husband was just doing everything for me, including the cooking. And my body really wanted whole foods, natural foods. But there was this one day when he was really tired and I couldn't get up to cook. And I said, why don't you put a frozen pizza in and heat it up? He put the frozen pizza in, he heated it up, I ate it, and I got even more sick. My energy just plummeted, like it drew me down. So when we eat food that has been charged or that is wild or that's organic, and the reason why I say this is because the earth is getting a lot of the vibration into the earth, and it's coming out through the produce of the foods. Mm-hmm. And if we can consume that sort of food with the nutrients that comes from it, it also helps lift our physical body into a different vibration. So these are like some of the examples.
Wow. Well, there is so much meat packed into this episode. So thank you so much for all your wisdom you've imparted on us today. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about what you do, about your trainings and everything?
My website is the best place to go to. So it is www.reenakumsarasingham.com.
It will be in my show notes. So it will be in my show notes. Yeah. Okay. So people can just find it and click on it that way. It'll make it a lot easier.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Reena, for your time today. I'm so grateful for our conversation. It was truly amazing and enlightening for me as well.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Amy. I really enjoyed being here and participating and talking with you.
Likewise. Thank you. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.